I
Yeah.
don't want anyone, thinking that I'm giving the perspective or the ideas of the district. This is just my perspective from that day as a officer on scene. I was a trainee for San Bernardino City Unified School District Police Department. By trainee, that means that I was actively on field work. However, I had a officer that I was assigned to that was training me in the school district's way of work. At the time, it was not my first police department, so this would be my second department that I was working for, and so I had a decent understanding and idea of how work was done, but I had to learn the school district's way.
How long had you been a law enforcement officer before December 2015, roughly?
About I was a reserve, so it was about 2 years. I did a year reserve for Rialto Police Department, and I also worked for Rialto PD as a full time officer for about a year, and then
Okay.
I went to San Marino School Police, which prior to Rialto, I had been a reserve for them. So I had bounced back and forth between those two departments a couple times. My shift started at 8 o'clock, 8 a.m. At the time, I was assigned to what's our shift two, which is our SRO shift. So I was the school resource officer for San Bernardino High School at the time.
So what do you remember about that day, before somewhere around 11 o'clock, probably a little bit after 11, when the word first gets to you that something is happening? What kind of things are you doing before?
Well, I remember exactly what we were doing. Me and my FTO, my training officer, we were leaving the jail. So we had just got to CDC and we were booking a subject that we had arrested. And we had just got done. We were just pulling out. We were on 3rd Street. And I remember this very, very well because we were just pulling up to Waterman. And as that happened, I remember there was a silver or gray Crown Victoria, which was for us at the time, we would call those unmarked or, like a detective or
Mhm.
admin type car. So this car was not marked as a police car, but clearly was. And that car was shot right past us. It was running code 3, which is lights and sirens. And we knew something was wrong because normally an unmarked car is not going to be running code 3 through the city. So we both saw that car drive by, and I was driving the unit at the time. And my FTO, he looks over at me and goes, I wonder what's going on. And right as he says that, our dispatcher tells us, I need you to go to the Inland Regional Center. And both of us are like, okay. And then over the radio, we start hearing all the chatter. Now, all of a sudden, San Bernardino PD's radio is going off with what's going on. And we realize what it is because we hear the person say, I have an active shooter
Wow.
at the regional center. I need units here now. And I think at the time there was three units were on scene.
Wow.
So when we showed up with, I think, 2 other units or 3. So we got there and these other units pulled up at the same time. And right as that happens, their lieutenant, I believe it was a lieutenant, I don't remember names. Uh, he got on the radio and said, hey, I have a couple fire trucks that are about to pull up. I need someone to help them set up a zone for our casualty zone. So we looked over at the other 2 San Bernardino PD officers and I think 1 deputy, and we were like, hey, we'll help fire. You guys go. So they went. We helped the fire. We basically posted up as security as they filled up their area to start their working for triage and all that. So they
Yeah.
set up all their stuff, moved their trucks, and we were doing security for them. So while they were zoning up, we were just holding that area, watching because we were, gosh, at the time that was like a hot triage area because we were very close to the front doors, walking
Of
distance
the
of
so what
the regional center.
when you first then got word, you see the unmarked car go by, you can tell something's going on, and then word begins to come through in the radio. around what time? I know you're not going to know the minute, but say if the incident happens at 11, or I think the first calls come in that something's happened around 11. Um, how much time would you say had passed by the time word got to you and to your training officer?
Maybe minutes.
Yeah.
It didn't seem like much time had gone by. When we were inside the jail, our radios weren't picking up all the other department chatter. We were just listening to our own department. And
Yeah.
at that point, none of that chatter had gotten to them. So I'd say maybe 5 minutes had gone by
Wow.
because they were still in the moments of those first officers getting there and them saying what they had. As we pulled up, we watched that team of guys go in. So two guys had already approached the building. One more, and I believe it was that lieutenant, was right behind them. And he's like, I got a 3-man unit, we're in. And we could hear all their radio traffic. So they had just entered as we pulled up. And that's how that whole situation started. They moved in, and another element of 3 moved in to move up with them. And they needed someone at that time because they were calling out the casualties they could see already. They're already calling out the amount of people that are down, what they're seeing inside. And they're like, we need that triage set up now because we have people down and we have blood. So we
Wow.
knew as much as we wanted to go in there and to be a part of that element, the fire department can't do their job if we don't push this job. So
Right.
that's what we ended up doing. We ended up taking that security zone for them and getting that started.
So when you got there, there were about 3 cars there. You got there, others arrived. So within the first couple minutes of you being there, there's just about 6 cars there.
Yeah.
And then some of these officers begin to go in immediately. You and the officer you're with, now you're going to set up security so fire can set up. And you're
Yeah.
hearing stuff on the you're hearing what they're reporting from inside the building on the radio.
Yes.
Wow. Had you had active shooter training?
Yes. I had gone through active shooter training at both Rialto Police Department and in the academy. And my department itself, we had we have a pretty particularly good set of supervisors, and one in particular likes to do mental scenarios. They're called I forgot what they're called, but basically he reads out a scenario to us, and he puts us through that scenario. And the idea is you have to go through your steps of arrival, what kind of things you need, what are you going to do for these problems that exist right now, how do you handle those, how do you bring in your next set of things. So we do those. They're called DMEs. That's what they're called, daily mental exercises.
Mm.
So we do those often, and we had been going through those that month, maybe every briefing. That sergeant, our supervisor, was putting us through that.
Wow.
And for that, it doesn't seem like a big amount of training. However, just going through the mental steps of what you're going to do helps you in the moment where you're like, what do I do? Because you've been talking about this
Yeah.
daily for months. So it just, that happened to work out. And then I had been through at Rialto PD a physical active shooter training, where we did it at one of the high schools. So I had been through that as well. And that was coordinated with the SWAT team at the time. So I got to observe and actively work in a little bit of that.
When word came in about what this was, you get the first sense of what it is. In your job, you're getting calls all the time. You're going to all kinds of things, and I'm sure you don't know exactly what's coming, and sometimes you don't have any idea what's coming. But in this case, you heard the phrase active shooter. Sounds like you heard that phrase.
Yeah.
That's what we've got. Going to this call compared to a ton of calls you'd gone to, the previous weeks, the previous months, was there a difference in your mind? Did, hearing that phrase, did that put you in a frame of mind different from what you would have been in the day before if you go to a call where there's an emergency?
Yes, because so I've been to several calls where we have either man gun or possible shots fired, but it's usually not an active scene when we get there. And oftentimes there's either no gun or it's so removed from when the timeline that it started that there's a relative idea that we're not showing up to a hot zone. We're pulling up to the zone as it's started to cool down. So it was one thing, but when you as you're arriving, when you start hearing someone say we have a person down, and then a person down, and then a person down, and that number seems to not stop, um, that changes your perspective pretty quickly. Um, I think that was the first time I had been to a multiple casualty event of that size. Um, Going there was one thing, but hearing that as I'm getting, because like I remember when they first said active shooter, we looked at each other, my FTO and I, we looked at each other, and both of us almost the same time were like, "Did she say active shooter?"
Mm.
Like almost in a like that's not real. And then she mentions it again, and she's giving us the circumstances, and I'm like, "That's real." And he's like, "Yeah, let's go." So we're going, and the whole time I'm like, "Here we go!" Like it's happening. And then we get there, and you're hearing the amount of people down, and you're like, "It's not just happening; it's we're in it." And that was different. It was an eye opener for sure.
One thing I'm wondering, is it just kind of training kicks in? And, sometimes people say they almost become automatons, the training kicks in. Like you asked them, what were you thinking? I wasn't thinking anything, just the training kicked in.
Yes.
Is it that? Is it that you are kind of consciously, mentally preparing yourself for something? Is it a combination of both? How's it working for you?
I'd say that it was 100%. It kicked in like almost like a robot, like autonomously. Your training is exactly what I fell back on. It was so you have at the time we had four different agencies there. One person is giving everyone orders, and there was at this moment there was no question in my mind. Who am I supposed to listen to? Do I listen to someone from school police? Do I listen to the sheriff that's there? Do I listen to city PD, or am I going to listen to the probation guys? Because there's 4 or 5 probation guys there now. And at that moment, it was like, no, we have one person with all this information who's giving it to us. We're going to do exactly what he says, and we're not going to question it. That was the first thing that started happening, and that happened without thought. Like I didn't have, no one had to tell me, listen to what they're saying. No one had to show me. I did it. But it was 100% like you just almost, I don't want to say robotic, but that's what it was. It was like like I stepped into another mode, and that mode was we have work to do and get it done. And that's exactly where it went. And I would say it was 100% a training type thing where the training that I've been taught kicked in, and my mind wasn't really, my body was in control by my mind, but I wasn't actually saying, "Hey, this is what we're doing." There was only 2 or 3 moments that I remember where I felt like the choices that were being made by me and not just automated. Um, and
Mm.
there was a woman in particular. I'll never forget it because it was on the news for a minute. She's wearing a purple shirt. Can't forget it. She's wearing a purple shirt. She has long brown hair, and we're helping her out of one of the trucks because that's what we ended up doing. One of the probation guys would pull up in his truck, and we'd all jump in the back of it, drive to the front of the inland center, and we go in and get people, and then pull them out, put them on the truck, and drive them to the triage area, which wasn't very far, but it was much quicker than trying to carry or bring people out that way. So we're doing that, and there's like maybe 4 or 5 vehicles doing this at the time. And this woman, we get her out of the truck, and we're trying to help her, and she goes, "I can't walk." And my mind, there's 2 of us trying to help her, but I didn't register that. It was just, "Oh, okay, you can't walk, I'll carry you." So I remember I picked her up, and I carried her the 30, 40 feet it was to the triage area and put her down. And in that moment, I'm like, why did I do that when there's 2 of us? We could have easily got her there quicker. But my mind was just, your leg is hurt. I don't want you to get hurt any further. And we need to quickly get you over there. So boom, it just happened.
So when you get there, there aren't very many responders yet, and you're actually
Yeah.
sort of preparing the way for the fire. That's the firemen who are coming. Um, so I'm interested listening to you. I'm interested in kind of order and chaos, right? Because I mean, as time goes on, the response is just going to be incredible. I mean, you've got
Oh
officers
yeah.
coming from just ton of agencies, all kinds of FBI and all kinds of state agencies and so on. And you're, I mean, you're not watching this, you're not focusing on this because you've got what's right in front of you, but this is happening around you. How would you describe it as it gets bigger, as more and more people are on the scene, as journalists begin to show up? Um, you know, was there always a kind of a sense of just automatic order? People just kind of fell into line and you know, leaders took charge, or did it get chaotic after a while? Or how would you describe just kind of how it went as the response became so massive?
It was a controlled chaos, I guess, would be the best way to put it, because there were moments where you looked up and you're like, there's so many people here. Some people don't even have a job. And
Mm,
you could see
yeah.
that. You could see people who were just, well, I'm here and I'll just be security. And they're kind of just there. They were needed because at the time, the amount of information that's realistically being relayed as far as who our suspect was, where they are, how many there were, was very vague.
Mm,
And it wasn't really being put out that much. Um, and then you kept hearing on the radio people saying that they spotted the vehicle over here and
mm,
that, and you're really not paying that much attention to it because you have so much going on in front of you. Because that triage area was 100% active almost the entire time. There was a lot going on. Not only did we have triage, but we had to set up a safe zone for all the people that weren't injured, which there were hundreds of employees in there. I want to say that at some point we had them all lined up. I mean, we had them lined up in like 5 or 6 lines, and we're just, what did you see? What did you hear? How many people? Whatever. And anyone that was giving any information that seemed useful, we're writing down their name, their date of birth, getting all their information, and walking them over to another area where they were going to be held to be talked to by the detectives.
one of the reasons this event that you're at, one of the reasons why it's going to stick in history. I mean, it's a because of what it was just by itself, but it's also linked to this whole huge theme of the war against terrorism, right? And
Yeah,
ISIS, and you know, it's much smaller than 9/11, but it's related to 9/11, and it's related to events overseas. The
yeah,
terrorists who did what they did in the Inland Regional Center that day were inspired by what was happening, you know, many thousands of miles away from the States. When you saw these probably former special forces guys now with air, you know, ATF um, gear, I mean, is that when it kind of began to dawn on you that, you know, that what had happened was huge, not only in the life of San Bernardino, but it was a big event that kind of had, that was part of an international story? And is that kind of when that began to dawn on you, or does that come much
yeah.
later?
I would say that's exactly how it felt. Like as soon when I saw them, that's my mind started going, is it this is this big? And then you start looking around and you start to realize just how many people are there, how many agencies are there. I mean, at one point, I want to say I saw units that were marked with Los Angeles departments on there. And I'm like, these guys drove a pretty decent distance and they got here while we're still doing triage. We're still taking people out the building. And
Wow.
you have LA County cars here. That's they they were close by for some kind of training or they moved a lot to get there. How that many agencies work together in a way that I don't think I'll ever experience again
Mm,
because there really wasn't any who's in control. Everyone knew who was. And
mm.
it's the one time in my career where you have that many agencies together um, doing something where no one wanted the spotlight, but everyone worked together in a way where it's just like, I'll never experience that. I know I will never experience that again.
Yeah. I want to go back to the beginning before this massive response shows up. You're there, they're just a handful of other cars. And you said you're listening to these guys on the radios, you and the other officer are, you know, preparing the area for the folks from the fire department. Um, and I don't mean this question to pry or to get, you know, dark stories, but my guess would be some of the things you heard come across that radio were kind of burned into your memory. I don't know that, but that would be my guess. But I mean, what kinds of things are you hearing them say on the radio in those first minutes?
Um, there are some things burned into my memory. Not necessarily all of them were about the people, but about some of the things that were being found inside. Um, at one point, I remember them saying that they're finding shell casings everywhere, which gives you an idea of just how many rounds of ammunition was shot inside the building.
Yeah.
But one of the ones that when it said, I remember stopping and it like stopped me for a second was when they started saying that they were finding IEDs. So they were finding explosive devices inside the building. And I remember I stopped and I started looking around like, if they're inside, where are they outside? There was a point where someone was on the radio. It was one of the tactical medical guys. And he was kind of like reminding people that how triage works, that there were certain people that need to be extracted now and others that wouldn't. And I remember as we walked in, I saw this individual that in my mind, I'm saying, we got to grab that person. But that whether or not that person was alive, I don't know. I can't say that. But I remember looking down and like your response as a human being is one thing, but then realistically, you have to save the people you can save. And it's like a hard choice people have to make. And I just remember seeing the tag that I was on that person and knowing that that person wasn't being picked up right now, that that person would be on the next or maybe even the time after that to be taken out. Just thinking to myself, the person who put that on, that person had to make that choice. We're able to confirm that there were pipe bombs and another like cell phone type bomb. And I don't know if you how much you were actually know, but there was a moment where the vehicle chase came, and I don't know if you remember, but the vehicle chase basically went right back to the building. They tried to get there, but then they realized that we had the road too far blocked and they couldn't. And the whole point with that was they believe that they were driving back in the area to get into range to set off the bigger explosive, and they just couldn't. And so it is without doubt that that was an IED and the others were pipe bombs. And I know for a fact there were pipe bombs because I stood next to one unknowingly
Well, yeah, I mean,
during a moment.
so this is something that I didn't know. So it sounds like you're saying the IEDs were in the building, and apparently the plan was for them to come back after other people had arrived and then set the IEDs off.
I don't know if that was their initial plan. I just know that when they were driving back, that was what was put out, that they were driving back with that type of intent, is least that was what was believed. At some point that night, I want to say it was much later, maybe around 5, when that whole I mean, it might have been 5, maybe been 2 o'clock when that chase of the vehicle began and they drove back into the area. We had just been relieved from that triage area. So we were told that, hey, you guys are good. We were technically cleared to go back to work. But then that chase happened and they went right by us. So we ended up getting into that pursuit. And in that pursuit, it came to an end. I want to believe it was on San Bernardino Avenue, but I don't remember the exact street. And so I was there at the end of that pursuit where the shootout and all that stuff happened. I was not involved in the shooting. There was way too many officers. We were very far in the back. But at a moment, they started talking about how they believe someone fled the vehicle. So almost all of us ran up to a point where we can start covering and trying to hold down these areas that we believe were the chase happened. And apparently, at some point during that vehicle pursuit, at the end, they threw some pipe bombs out their car. And we're standing by, I want to say we're looking at this house that we believe someone may have ran to the backyard of. And I won't forget this because it was kind of, I mean, in hindsight, it kind of makes you giggle a little. But it's not funny, to be totally honest. But so it's me, a supervisor, to actually 2 supervisors and my FTO. And we're standing at this car where it's a highway patrol car, and behind us is another highway patrol car. And we're using that car for cover as we're looking down at this house, trying to get the people that are in it to obey some orders. And I'll never forget, I'm standing next to, and he looks down beside him, and then he turns around and walks by this car, the car that's directly behind us. And then he just walks away. And all of us are like, what is he doing? And they're trying to figure out what's going on. And he walks over to I want to say a captain with the highway patrol, and he goes, hey, there's a bomb by your guys' car over there. There's a pipe bomb. And so all of us then, because he points at it, look behind us, and it's probably 10 feet away from us.
Wow.
And it's literally right behind us. And all of us ran because at that moment we realized there's a bomb there. And at the end of it, I remember we're sitting down in a group of us waiting to talk to, at the end of the incident, they had a bunch of psychologists at the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department for us to debrief with and talk to and just make sure, hey, if you saw something, if you feel like you need some counseling, you can get that. So we're sitting there waiting to talk to them, and like, just, it's 5 of us officers just kind of sitting there.
Yeah.
And in that moment, someone brought it up and goes like, what were you thinking? Why didn't you say something? He goes, well, that's what I did. I went to go tell the lieutenant. And he goes, well, why didn't you tell us? We're standing next to it. And he goes, oh, I didn't think of that. And in that moment, we all kind of laughed. And
Yeah,
because in hindsight, we survived, so it's okay. But it wasn't okay because of that moment, but
right.
one of the things we still laugh about. And I think it's because of throughout that day, we had gone through so much that there was very little at that time that I think was going to get us amped up. Because I mean, in that moment, I think we had been put on alert 3 or 4 times. We had a crazy, strange person drive up with talking about he was there to help us. He had a sword. I mean, like there was a lot of weird things going on that no one really talks about. That legitimately a weird person drove up with a car. I'll never forget. It was a Geo Metro he tried to drive up to the golf course, and he got out of the car, and the guy's wearing like this weird tactical stuff, and he has a sword on his hip, and he was like, I'm here to help.
Did the
And
police
all
throw
of
their
us
weapons on him? Just sort of, who is this?
There was a lot of people who did, but a lot of us are just like, what's wrong with you? Like, did you really think your sword was going to help in this moment?
So when the pipe bomb was pointed out, you guys ran. Did they then send in the bomb squad to take care of it?
Yeah, so that the way those things got handled was kind of like on a priority base. And so what ended up happening is all of us just moved away from that area, but we still had to hold down this spot where this person had supposedly ran, which turned out to be just a person who had a warrant who ran. So a person did actually run from the area, but it wasn't from the car. He was never associated with the car or them. But so they first had to clear the car. So they had the SWAT team do all that. And then after that, they had parts of the SWAT team that were bomb certified. Those guys came in and cleared areas and moved cars and got all that done.
So we're talking about the latter part, and I want to go back to the Inland Regional Center. But just another question in where you are now, sort of from those of us who are on the outside looking in, phase 1 is the regional center. I guess phase 2 would be the search, where are the shooters? And then phase 3 is the shootout. You weren't in the shootout. Could you hear it?
Oh, yeah, I could see it.
You could see it.
Yeah, as we pulled up, it was actively happening. So there was, I wouldn't know the number, but at least probably 50 or 60 police cars. So we're towards the back of that. There were cars behind us too, but we had to move forward. And as we're running forward towards it, you can hear it, you can see it. You can see the officer who was unfortunately pinned down behind his car, because there was one car that was the closest to that. And that guy was the one who was calling out hey, I'm in pursuit of this vehicle. He was the one who found it. And so we were running up towards that when this happened. So I watched it all go down, but there's a point where you're not involved because there's too many people already involved. what is one more person shooting going to
Yeah,
do?
right, yeah. I'm guessing you'd never, as many officers as were returning fire, I'm guessing you'd never heard anything like that before.
No, well, I had when you're at the gun range for training.
Oh, at the gun range, yeah.
So it was kind of like that. It was just a volley, a line of fire going on. So, I mean, I was never in the military, but I would assume that that's what it sounds like when a squadron starts to fire back at whoever the bad guys are.
Let's go back to the Inland Regional Center. And, um, folks are coming out, folks who are not wounded are coming out, folks who are wounded are coming out. You've set up the triage area. What kind of interactions do you remember having? You mentioned the lady with the purple shirt who's in the back of the truck. You carry her to a different place. Um, are there a couple other memories you have of interactions you have with folks, wounded or not wounded, coming out of the building?
Um, so there was a lot of people that were just, and fair enough to say they were scared, a little traumatized. They didn't know what to do, and it's very rare that you find yourself around people where you find yourself needing to tell them how to do things like walk, and they're like, where? Over there. What do I do when I get there? And it's one of those things that happens with trauma. So when you find yourself in a situation where you're someone under trauma, sometimes you have to literally explain things to them like a child. And that was probably the first time I had to do that in that magnitude, where it's like, okay, we need you guys to go over there. And there were some people you could tell you're talking to them and it's just in one ear, it's going over their head. They're so in that a panic zone that they can't hear. Um, you can look at them and you can tell it's a million yard stare. You're talking to them, looking them in their eyes. They're looking at you, but they're looking through you. Like they're in a moment of panic and fear that you're not breaking. And those people, you're just escorting them to this area where they can be put in a safe place and brought back to earth, if to say. And so I remember a lot of people like that. There were some people that were crying, um, which is fair enough. Most of the people that were injured were in like a shock like thing, because there was a couple people that I'd say they were injured and they had gone through all the stages of shock. So fear, then anxiety, and then they're just calm. And they're at that point where they're like, all right, people are here to help me. Tell me what I need. Where do I go? What do I do? And those people were there's two. I remember this one woman. I want to say her injury was like some glass fell on her from the shooting. And I remember she was like, where do I go and what do I do? And I was like, this is where you need to go. You need to go over there. She's like, I was like, can you walk? She's like, I can walk. I can get there myself, help somebody else. Like that's how she was talking to me. And so you can tell this person she's in the moment. She's there. And just watching her go, where do I go? Who do I talk to? Okay, over there. All right. And she walks off and you could see like she had gone through all those stages. She had already been, fear had left. She's probably still scared. Don't get that wrong.
Yeah.
But she knew if I sit here scared, something bad will happen. So I have to move to where I need to go. I need to be able to explain to these people what I need. And she had already gone through all that. And it was, so you had moments where you're seeing the strength in people. And then you have moments where you're seeing what fear looks like, people who are really scared. And then you have other people where you're seeing, if you've never seen someone in real shock, you got to see it. So I had seen shock before from other injuries, from very bad car accidents to people who had been shot, so I'd seen that before, but in this magnitude, no, I had not seen this many people in that version of shock. And then there were people who weren't even hurt, who were never injured from anything or anyone, who were in that level of shock because, and I'll remember it, this one person, she told me that he walked over to her, because this is the way she said it. He walked over to me and he looked at me and then he pointed the gun at me, but then he just turned and walked away. And she was still in that shock. That's all she said. And then she just sat there. And we helped her up. We walked her over to an area where she could be safe, and she sat back down and she just looked at the ground. That's what she did. It was probably 2 or 3 days later where people finally started asking, so what did you see? What happened? And I can give them that. And I can tell you there's a lot of different things that resulted from that. I mean, I think I encountered maybe throughout that incident, there was one point where I remember I talked to a resident on the street where the vehicle came to a stop and the shootout was, where we're moving up trying to get to these parts and you can hear gunshots. So everyone's kind of moving and trying to find cover. And at one moment, I remember I moved over towards this house and I was hiding behind this car. I wouldn't say hiding, I was taking cover behind this car. And I looked over my shoulder and there's this guy standing there with his cell phone. And I was like, dude, those are actual gunshots. Go inside. Like, this video you're taking is not worth it. And he was like, you're right. He went inside.
Did you keep track of the news, or were you eager to get the day behind you? What was your own thinking? Because of course, this is a story that's a major news story for many days after. Were you interested in keeping track of it, or did you just want to put it behind you and move on?
I watched the press conferences that were being given out, just to see if there was any new information that I didn't know already. Some of it I didn't really. Most of it, if I did, I read it. So I would just look it up and just read whatever articles people were putting out. But the actual news, I didn't watch. Our department was getting updates constantly. Our chief and assistant chief was frequently going to their command post and getting updates and coming back and telling us stuff. So for the most part, I felt like we got a lot of it from that. So I didn't really, but the people in my life were always on the news watching it. So the conversation would be had. So I would get it kind of unwillingly, but I didn't actually really watch the news other than the press conferences. One of the biggest takeaways I got from that, and I remember this pretty well, the deputy that was pinned down is either a deputy or an officer. He was pinned down behind his car. And I want to say it was a deputy. So he had his service pistol and he had his rifle inside the car. And then he had a backup weapon, if I'm correct. And from what I understand, he had 5 or 6 magazines for the rifle. And then he had, I'm going to say, the standard 3 sets of magazines for his service pistol. And then he had the one backup gun. And I remember when they finally got to him, he was down to the last couple rounds in his backup gun.
Wow.
And I remember they were saying that there was thousands of rounds still inside of the car that Farouk and them had, which would mean that he was at a point where he was going to have to save those rounds for that just in case they get out and come to him. He was down to that, but they were still armed to the teeth. That changed my perspective on preparing myself for work. So for now, in my unit, when I go to work, when I set it up, I have countless extra rounds of ammunition for just my service pistol alone. I no longer just do the idea of I'll carry what they give me and that's it. I probably have 3 times the amount now that I just keep in the car. That way, if something happens and I can't get to, say, my rifle, or I can't get to a backup weapon, at least I can keep loading my handgun.
Wow.
So that I'm never in that position.
Sounds like you're saying this very first officer, the officer closest to the terrorists when that firefight breaks out, it sounds like you're saying he was by himself or almost.
Yes, he was by himself. He was
Wow.
by himself at that car. She was missing her shoes. Like, she somehow either while working in the office had taken them off while this happened, or she had lost them in the moment of running. She may have been wearing heels and kicked them off so she can run better, but she was missing her shoes. And when we got out of the truck and we're trying to help her, we're walking in an area full of thorns. I remember that. So when she's like, I can't walk, my foot's injured and my leg's injured, and I looked down and I could see she didn't have shoes. I just remember going, it's okay, I'll help you. And she like looked in my eyes, and I'll never forget. If I saw her again, I'd probably recognize her. And I remember saying, don't worry, I'll help you. I got you. So I pick her up and I start walking her over there. And I remember her just looking at me and saying, thank you. And she's like staring at me the whole time. And I remember feeling awkward because it's like, I didn't know what to say to make her feel better other than it's okay. We're going to take care of you. But I didn't know what else to say to her. And I don't think if I was in that position now, I would know really what to say to her. I think I'd have a better idea of how to bring her to ease. But in that moment, like, I didn't know what to say. And there was that. And then the other woman I told you, when she told me what happened, I don't think I actually even said anything to her. When she told me, like, he pointed the gun at me and then walked away, I think I just said, like, I think I just looked at her and was like, okay, well, this is where we need you to go. In hindsight, I wish I would have, knew what to say to her. Like, hey, it's okay. You're alive. You're here now. There was a particular person that I spoke to when we were doing the interviews of the people that were inside, and it's interesting because I knew this person before. So he was a volunteer, a citizen patrol basically at Rialto PD, and he worked at the regional center, and he was in the building when it happened. So I'm talking to him, and he says to me some information. I'm not going to put it out there, but basically he said something that just caught me off guard. What he said was, I'm pretty sure the second person that was in the building was a female. And I was like, why do you think that? And he said, it's the way she walked. And so I remember I was like, all right, cool. I wrote his information down and I walked him over and I said, I think this guy has some information you guys are going to want to talk to him about. And then I'll never forget, I think the next morning they put out that the person that was with him was a female. That always stuck out because he was the only person I talked to that entire day that thought the other shooter was a woman.
There's a little bit of disconnect because, these folks, given what they've had, at least some of them are going to want some kind of human connection. But you and the other responders, you're at work, this is business for you, and that's why it's so important to have the counselors showing up at the scene, because someone needs to deal with that human stuff, but it can't be you. I mean, not at that moment anyway, it can't be you. So just listening to say that, it kind of dawned on me, well, that's why it's important in these kinds of events to have the folks whose job it is just to talk to these folks and begin that process.
Yeah, not only for the victims but also for the officers, because I can tell you time and time again, you compartmentalize stuff as officers. We do it all the time where you go from one call, because I mean, I can tell you, I've been at work where I've dealt with a car accident where someone who was either fatal or seriously injured, and then the next moment I'm on a call where I'm dealing with a kid who doesn't want to go into the classroom. It's it's not spoken about a lot in law enforcement about how you go from moment to moment to moment with different levels of anxiety, different levels of emotion, and even different levels of just, I guess, trauma would be the best way to put it. And you're expected to turn it on and off, on and off, on and off. That's not very good mentally for us. And it creates a problem that if you don't deal with it, you never know what that's going to do on the long run. And I think one of the things that came out of this situation that was very good was whoever's idea it was, whether it was the counseling team, because that's the team that came out. They're called the counseling team. Whether it was their idea, whether they contacted the sheriff's department and said, hey, we're coming to help you with this, or if it was the sheriff's department or whoever's idea it was to have them there, and before officers could leave the scene, had to debrief with them, that was genius. Because I think that helped a lot of those officers not be forced to compartmentalize. I know I didn't have to that day, and because I was at work the next day.
You received a life-saving award. What was your response when you heard that you were going to be given this award?
I mean, so, and honestly, it was one of those things where it was like, I saved a life, like in my mind, but then realistically, yeah, I'd say we did. There is a lot of people in that triage area that if we weren't able to set that up quickly and get them out, the casualties wouldn't have been 14, it would have been more, or, maybe a couple of people. I'm not sure how critical some of the critical people were that were able to survive. So I would say it's one thing, but I don't think most of us actually feel like we deserve an award like that. I think sometimes you're like, no, I did my job.
Mhm.
That's what I did what I was supposed to do. But then at the same time, it's like, yeah, but that's kind of the reason for doing the job. Not everyone can do it.
Mhm.
Not everybody, and I'm not even talking about it in a physical sense, but like mentally, not everyone is prepared to be the person that shows up to that. And so, I mean, I guess to be honored for what I did is cool, but I don't feel like a lifesaver. Um, I feel like I did what I was supposed to do. I feel like I did what I took an oath for, and I feel like I did what I was morally is correct. But I mean, it's a nice thing to have. I have it. It's my life-saving award sits in my room right next to a couple other things, little law enforcement thing that I have set up in my room. It's got a little Bible next to it. And
Mhm.
it's a reminder of that day.